Quick context for anyone catching up. This is Silo, the Apple TV Plus adaptation of Hugh Howey's novels, and by season 3, the entire show has organized itself around one object. A pipe. Not a bomb, not a virus, a pipe. It's called the safeguard procedure, and it sits outside every silo, connected to the ventilation system, ready to flood 10,000 people with poison the moment Silo 1 decides that Silo has become a problem. We learned the safeguard exists at the end of Season 2. We learned it can theoretically be stopped because Jimmy's parents supposedly stopped it back during the Silo 17 rebellion. But the show never gave us the mechanics. It gave us a rumor passed down through a traumatized child. That's it. Season 3 has spent its entire runtime trying to turn that rumor into a repeatable plan, because Juliette isn't just trying to survive one safeguard trigger anymore. She wants Silo 1 to lose the ability to pull that lever ever again. Episode 8, titled Grey Goo, is where the rumor finally becomes an instruction manual. The episode splits its attention, but the half we care about follows Patrick Kennedy, sent back into the ruins of Silo 17 specifically to find physical proof of what Jimmy's parents did. Kennedy isn't guessing. He's working off Jimmy's fragmented childhood memories, off a diagram Bernard drew showing how the silos branch off from a central hub, and off pure procedural instinct. This isn't a ghost story for him. It's an engineering problem. And here's the detail I think gets undersold. Kennedy doesn't go in alone thinking about himself. He's traveling with Lucas, who takes a bullet through his own radio equipment on the way there, which is either the luckiest or unluckiest thing that happens to anyone this episode depending on how you look at it. They limp into Silo 17 injured, and the first thing that happens once they're inside isn't triumphant. It's Jimmy fixing their radio with nothing but spare parts and a manual, because apparently 30 years of isolation turns you into a very capable engineer. Small detail, big payoff later. Keep that in your back pocket. Kennedy tracks the pipe down to Judicial, level 14, which honestly checks out because that's exactly where Jimmy's mother worked. Her name, by the way, gets confirmed on screen this season. Gwen Conroy. 2 seasons of calling her Jimmy's mom, and we finally get to say her actual name. Kennedy reaches a compartment near the pipe and finds it welded shut. Not damaged. Not collapsed. Welded. Deliberately sealed from the inside, which immediately tells you 2 things before you even open it. Someone chose to be in that room, and someone chose to never come back out. When the panel finally opens, Gwen is there, still in her cleaning suit, and laid out around her is basically a complete confession if you know how to read it. The pipe has a cap on it. Her welding torch is nearly out of fuel, and the seam behind Kennedy has been closed from her side of the wall. You don't need dialogue to understand what happened. The room tells the story by itself. That here's where I want to slow down, because this is the smartest piece of writing in the episode, and it's easy to blow past it if you're just watching for plot beats. Gwen didn't get instructions from anyone. There was no Silo 18 sending her a diagram, no Kennedy walking her through it over a radio. She found this pipe herself, mid-rebellion, with the silo collapsing around her, and she worked out the physics of stopping it in real time. Cutting the line to install a cap meant exposing herself to whatever was already inside it. Her torch had a limited fuel supply, which meant she was racing a clock nobody set for her. And once the cap went on, she had a choice. Walk back out and risk carrying contamination into the rest of the silo, or seal the door and remove that risk permanently. She chose the second option. She welded herself into a room she was never getting out of, because the alternative was gambling with everyone else's air. That's not a rescue. That's not a last stand against an enemy. It's a woman doing quiet, technical, unglamorous work until there was no more work left to do, and then accepting the consequence of doing it properly. Silo has a habit of dressing up its sacrifices with big speeches. This one doesn't get a speech. It gets a welded seam and a nearly empty fuel tank. Somehow that's more effective. Naturally, Jimmy does not want her moved. And if you've been watching the show for 2 seasons, that reaction should make complete sense to you. This is a man who has spent 30 years associating disappearance with permanent loss. Everyone he has ever cared about has vanished through a door and never come back. Now, for the first time, someone he lost has a physical location. She's not in absence anymore. She's right there. And his instinct is that touching her, moving her, disturbing that room, is going to turn discovery back into disappearance. Kennedy needs the body moved anyway, because the position of everything in that compartment is the actual data silo 18 needs to replicate the fix. This isn't sentiment for Kennedy. This is a technical requirement wrapped inside an emotional minefield. And to his credit, the show doesn't let him just override Jimmy with authority. He earns the permission instead. Kennedy tells Jimmy about Doris, about how Silo 18 handles death. With ceremony, with story, with a community that shows up and carries the loss together instead of pretending it didn't happen. It's a small scene, no raised voices, no swelling music cue doing the emotional labor for the actors. Just two men talking about how their respective silos process grief. And it lands because Jimmy says the line that I think is going to get quoted more than almost anything else in the show's run. He tells Kennedy he never knew anyone who died until everyone did. Sit with that for a second. This is a person whose first experience with death wasn't a grandparent, wasn't a pet, wasn't a slow goodbye you get time to process. It was an entire civilization disappearing around him in the span of what felt like moments. No funerals. No adults left standing to explain what a funeral even is. No way to separate one person's death from 10,000 at once. Grief, for Jimmy, was never a skill he got to practice in small doses. It arrived all at once at 12 years old, and he never got a second chance to learn it properly. That single sentence recontextualizes basically everything we've watched him do for 2 seasons. The paranoia, the threats through the vault door, the refusal to let anyone in. It's not cruelty. It's a person who never got taught what safety after loss is supposed to look like. Kennedy's offer of a funeral is, in a strange way, the first time in 30 years anyone has offered to teach him that there's a companion piece happening here that's worth pulling out on its own. Because Episode 8 doesn't just close the loop on Gwen. It reframes Russell Conroy too. We already knew Russell sacrificed himself directly, put his own body between his son and the people coming for the vault. That's the kind of sacrifice that's easy to understand instinctively because it's immediate and it's visible. You can watch it happen and know exactly what it cost. Gwen's sacrifice is the harder kind to recognize because it's slow, procedural, and happened somewhere nobody was watching. She didn't die protecting one person. She died protecting an entire population she'd never get to meet the surviving half of. Where Russell's sacrifice was personal, Gwen's was systemic. One parent saved the child directly. The other parent saved the child's entire world, indirectly, and then vanished into a silence that lasted 30 years because there was no one left alive who knew what she'd done. Put those together, and you get the full shape of who raised Jimmy for the first 12 years of his life. Two people who, faced with a collapsing society, chose to spend the last moments of their agency protecting other people rather than saving themselves. It's honestly one of the more quietly devastating parental backstories I've seen a genre show commit to, because it never asks you to cry about it directly. It just keeps handing you evidence and lets you do the math that here's why this episode isn't just a tearjerker detour. Once Kennedy examines that compartment properly, he radios the method back to Silo 18 in code so Juliette's people can replicate it without needing their own tragedy first. The new plan, according to what gets relayed, is to locate the equivalent pipe in Silo 18, pinch it airtight, cut it further downstream than Gwen was able to, and weld a permanent cap into place with actual redundancy built in. In other words, Silo 18 gets to skip straight to Gwen's final answer without repeating 30 years of trial and error, and without anyone needing to weld themselves into a room to do it. That's the structural function of this whole storyline. The silos are designed to keep every population isolated from every other population, specifically so lessons like this one never travel. A woman's death in Silo 17, kept secret for 3 decades, finally makes it onto a radio wave and into Silo 18's hands. That's Silo's whole thesis in miniature. Information is the one resource Silo 1 has never been able to fully contain, and every time it leaks, the entire system built on isolation gets a little more fragile. Meanwhile, back in Silo 18, things are not exactly calm while all this happens. Juliette gets captured by Camille Sims and her enforcers before the episode is even done, which means the plan Kennedy just radioed home now has to survive without the one person who was supposed to execute it. And Shirley Campbell, Juliette's closest friend, is revealed this episode to be pregnant, deliberately, which raises the stakes on an already dangerous mission in a way the show clearly wants you sitting with going into the next episode. Then I want to close on why I think this particular hour is going to hold up as one of the better ones in the show's run. And it's not because of a twist. There's no twist here. Everyone already suspected Jimmy's parents did something heroic. What makes episode 8 work is that it refuses to let heroism be simple. Gwen Conroy isn't given a rousing final speech. She's given a torch running low on fuel and a decision to make in silence. Jimmy isn't given a clean emotional release. He's given a stranger's kindness and one sentence that explains 30 years of behavior in 11 words. And the plot mechanics, the actual how to stop the safeguard information, arrive not through a convenient info dump, but through a woman's dead body and the patience it takes to read a room correctly. That's good writing. It trusts the audience to connect sacrifice to consequence without underlining it 3 times. And it sets up Silo 18's endgame with real stakes, because now we know exactly what it costs to disable one of these pipes the hard way, and exactly what Juliette's people are trying to avoid repeating. So that's episode 8 broken down. A welded door, a name we finally get to say out loud, and a sentence that might be the saddest thing Jimmy has said in 3 seasons without raising his voice once. If you want the rest of the season broken down the same way, there's a full watch order and recap series building on this channel right now. Drop your take on Gwen's sacrifice in the comments. I'm curious whether people think Silo 18 can actually pull this off without losing someone the way Silo 17 did. Subscribe if you want the next breakdown the moment it drops, and I'll see you in the next one.